Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining me today. My name is Jennifer Hargrave, and I am the owner of Hargrave Family Law. I am really excited today to have the opportunity to talk with Dr. Matthew Housson. I first met Dr. Housson when my son was evaluated for ADD, and I can tell you that the Housson Center has been an awesome resource to our family for the past 10 years. As we all make these adjustments right now to the circumstances that we're facing, I thought it'd be a great time to hear from an expert about good expectations in our home for trying to teach our children and the new circumstances that we face. So, Dr. Housson, I first want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day. While we know that this presents a physical health crisis, it is also a mental health issue. So I know you're busy, and I appreciate you being with us.
No, thank you, Jennifer. It's my pleasure. It's nice to use this venue. A lot of people are at home and not able to come in. We have been using telehealth to communicate with families that we work with, and we're fortunate for that. I've had a phone call this morning with a school. It was a Zoom phone call where we had parents and teachers and administrators. So we're still trying to do the business of taking care of our children and educating them. And we're using technology and innovation in order to connect and make sure that our children continue to be well taken care of, both educationally and from their mental health. A funny story before the call, I checked in with my wife at home, and she informed me that our 10-year-old's been officially expelled from homeschooling. So I can imagine that there's a lot of parents who are ready to expel their kids. So hopefully today we can spend some time, talk about some strategies that we can share with families, try to give some levity to the situation, but also good advice that people can use. We really do have to join together and pull our resources. And so I think it's a great venue, and I really appreciate you setting this up and making it available.
Thank you. One of my first questions is, as a newbie to distance education and learning remotely, because it certainly wasn't available when I was in school, I want to know, is this a valid way for children to learn? Are they learning through these programs?
It's a good question, and I actually did some research. The Department of Education did a 2010 study. It was a meta-analysis where they looked at distance learning programs, and they actually found that distance learning, online learning certainly has its place in education. All of us who are at home, who are homeschooling, have to remind ourselves that we're parents, we're not educators. And so I think that while the technology's there, the format's there, the schools are really doing a good job. Most of the schools and families that I work with had been on spring break last week, and so this is their first week back to school. And so I've seen different platforms that schools have used, from Zoom to Google Hangouts to different proprietary programs and technology that schools have used. And most of the families that I've worked with have found that it's user friendly and that the kids are responding to it. I think that we'll see next week that the kinks are worked out this week. And I really do feel like, from what I'm hearing and seeing with my families and our own family, it really is, it's serving its function. It's providing material and content to families, but it's also clear, and we're clear to say, parents are parents and families are families, and we want to look to our educational educators, our teachers, administrators, those professionals who can provide the content, and then we'll do the best we can, because this is a hunker down, gather together, and we'll get through this. And then our children will get caught up and get their education back on track as we get through this crisis.
I love what you just said about doing the best that we can. I think it's important to acknowledge that these aren't normal circumstances. So what do you think is reasonable for us to expect from our children in terms of their learning right now?
I think that families and parents, just the ones that we've talked to, have had a lot of questions of basically, what do we do? Professionally, when I interact with pediatrician friends and attorney friends and pastors and priests, each of us look at each other and say, there's no template, there's no paradigm. None of us have a paradigm to face this type of issue. I had two families I worked with who have very successful businesses, and for the first time, or not only the first time, but in a really tangible way, I've had fathers saying, I don't know what to do. I have businesses and I'm letting people go. And emotionally, this is very dysregulating from from our kids all the way up to the adults. And so, long-winded answer to your question, I think that we need to think about the basics. And when we talk about what are the basics, it goes back to schedules, it goes to sleep, it goes to exercise, and it goes to families connecting together within their internal family, and then within their relationships as best we can virtually. So I know we'll talk today a lot about social media and how we screen times, because the rules are different. These are different times, and I think we have to flex. I think the main message to parents is, don't be too hard on yourselves. We're going to get through this, and we're going to just have to take some deep breaths and stick to fundamentals in order to do so.
I think that's such an important message. You just touched on something before we get into some specifics, strategies to help with our kids, but you touched on something that has me really concerned these days, and that is a couple weeks ago, screen time was limited in my house, right? We had the protections on, and my kids were really limited in terms of their access, or at least I hope they were. Sometimes they outsmart me. But this is a different day, and our kids are spending a lot of time on screen time. So has the paradigm shift? Have the rules shifted? What advice do you have for us regarding screen time and kids?
Yeah, I think really one of the important things is what's being consumed on the screen. There's such good content out there that families can use, that's video based, that's really actually engaging for children. Typically, when we talk about screen time, what comes to my mind is video games, multi-level games where you play this level to go to this level. And those are dark holes that a lot of kids go down. I think that what we want to do today is provide families with good content that can be educational, and then also give alternatives. Jennifer, you and I are around the same age. We didn't have the luxury of videos when we were younger, so we're going to go back to our roots and talk about games and activities that we did when it was August in Texas and it was no longer fun to swim. There's things we can do, I think, and there's lots of content on the internet and Facebook already that people are sharing. But we're going to talk about some of those things so that we can give healthy content to families to consume that's reasonable, and then we can also give healthy alternatives to only media-based information.
Awesome. I am going to correct you though. I did at least have the game of Pong when I was growing up. So.
That's right. I remember my neighbor across the street, his dad worked for Radio Shack, and he brought home Pong, and we thought we had just found sliced bread.
Yeah.
So you're right. I'm corrected. Thank you.
And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I do want to encourage our attendees to ask questions. That is an option. And so we want to hear from you, and we'll take time at the end of this to go over your questions. All right, so let's talk about content and strategies. What advice can you give us?
Okay, so here's kind of a template that I use a lot with the families I work with. I ask the question, what time do your kids need to be up? And so typically the answer during the school day is 6:45 to 7. And then from there, we count backwards to, well, then when do they need to go to bed? We know that children 0 to 5 really need 12 hours of sleep. So if you think about 7 o'clock wake up, you're talking about 7 o'clock bedtime. So moving from there, 6 to 8 is 11 to 12 hours. Most kids under age 12 need to be minimum 10, ideally 11 hours of sleep. Teenagers, we just want to get them to get as close to 8 hours as we can, right? So going to, using that template. So now we back up, we are getting in bed somewhere between 7 and 8:30. Now let's flip it and let's say, let's start the day. So we're homeschooling now. I'm encouraging families to have children wake up around the same time that they are when they were in school. There's physiological reasons for that and psychological reasons. The physiological reason is sleep is very much about a rhythm, and our bodies have circadian rhythms. And so when you talk to sleep experts, they're going to say you want to keep your sleep time, wake up time, go to bed time as consistent as possible. And our kids have had a couple of insults to that process. One, the time change happened, beginning of March, and then most everybody went on spring breaks. And so in addition to coping with being at home, we're having to cope with resetting their circadian rhythms. So we want to do that. It's important because I know in our family, the biggest emotional outbursts that ever occur were on the night after a sleepover when somebody stayed up till 12, 1, 2, and yes, 3 o'clock in the morning. So sleep's foundational. Sleep's foundational because that's when we build dopamine, that's when we build norepinephrine, that's when we build serotonin. These are mood and attention regulating neurotransmitters and neurochemicals. If we compromise sleep, then we are already behind the curve for the day when we're asking our kids emotionally to cope with a really challenging situation. They don't have the reserve of brain chemical to handle that challenge. So we start with sleep. We then go to breakfast, and then we go to most of the schools now with their online platforms are starting the content. They're pushing content between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning. The recommendation for families now, I know in our family, our dining room is also referred to me as our mail room. It's where we put the mail. No one uses that room. So we've set that room up as our classroom. It's the room in the house that's the least functional. And so we're having families try to set a designated study area. TVs are off. Other distractions in the home are kind of muted. And we want kids in that 9 to 10 o'clock time frame being in the classroom. Some of the schools that I work with where the students wear uniforms, they're having the kids put their uniform on. Some of my funny guys that I work with say, yeah, but I'm just wearing my boxers and my shirt on. So, but they're putting their uniform on, and it's the idea of let's get in the mode of learning. So lunch, most of the time now the kids are finishing a little bit earlier. 1 o'clock, between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock is what I've seen. And that really has been, for the most part, new classroom material that's being presented as well as homework. There's a lot of time in the day that younger kids go and get art and music. Older kids have free periods. So most of the kids are finishing somewhere between 1 and 3. 3 o'clock, that's where in Texas, at least the last week has been warm. We've had kids jumping into swimming pools. We've had kids going outside. This is where we want to think about art, music, physical education. So parents, I think that since our kids aren't going to these special classes through online, it's difficult to do it. Some of the schools are giving exercise and things like that. Physical activity secondary to sleep is the other means of physiologically changing the brain. So the recommendation there is 45 minutes of aerobic exercise. That can be swimming, that can be bike riding, that can be playing in the backyard, that can be going for a walk, walking the dog. We want to think about those type of activities to serve the function of physical education. We've seen in the nation what's happened to schools who have tried to cut down physical education. It doesn't work. Kids need activity, and if we're only online or only in home and not providing that physical activity, then you can expect, especially if you're not sleeping well, to have a lot of emotional dysregulation. So sleep and exercise, those of you who've worked with me before, know that those are my mantras, and those are very foundational in terms of helping kids to be regulated.
I'll say one of the things that I've seen as a benefit of this time is that some of our enrichment activities have gotten really creative with doing online classes. So we've got ballet classes that are going online. We've got voice lessons and music lessons. And so, I love the instructors who are getting creative with that.
Yeah, I think it's great, and there's a lot of that content that's out there. Since most of the families I've seen there in the schools are getting content out for math and reading and writing, what I haven't seen as much, and it just may be my sample, is much good information on science and chemistry. These are for younger kids, I would say, science and then music. So a couple of websites that I think are helpful that have really good content. There's a website, Brain Pop and Brain Pop Junior. These are educational videos that actually during the school day, a lot of educators use. That platform is really very good. And then for middle school and high schoolers, there's amazing content on Khan Academy, KAHN. Just unbelievable content. A lot of families who homeschool use Khan Academy as their, primary content. Again, I want to be careful about that because most of the schools are pushing material that's relevant to the students where they are in the curriculum. So I don't want parents to feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to augment and do this much more, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to consume what your public or private school is providing you, allow children to feel the success of it, and then we want to use this as an opportunity for families really to reconnect. If you think about that, we really, prior to this situation, have gotten really pretty disconnected. Case in point, I met with a family and they said, this is great. We don't have ballet. We don't have baseball. We don't have this. We don't have that. They said, I'm loving our family and our family life more than I ever have enjoyed it. And, the point is yes, we are going to have to make lemonade out of lemons and see silver linings. And while our nation's dealing with this medical crisis and the virus, we go back to our foundations. We go back to our family, we go back to our faith, and we go back to our friends. And even though it's hard to access those things in person, we're very well connected, through technology. But it is going to be those foundational relationships that allow us to move through this, because the virus is a different type of enemy than we've ever dealt with, and that's what's been so discombobulating about it.
When you were talking about bedtimes, it brought to mind power struggles, because that's usually a time in my house when we have power struggles. And I know especially with teenagers who are really wanting to get together with friends, and we really can't allow them to do that. There are a lot of power struggles going on in the home, in addition to education. What strategies do you have for us to help work with our strong-willed children?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what? The strategy I use on that a lot of times is I'll ask the adolescent, because adolescents are very, very good cognitively, except when they're emotional, right? And so they're typically emotional when they're tired, when they haven't exercised well. So what I would say before 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, when you engage in that conversation, find the time to sit down and say, hey, look, let's figure out, what do you think is a reasonable time for you to go to bed? And I would ask that question to them, and I would say, all right, so you're saying 11 o'clock, fine. For your age, 11 o'clock, 8 hours is what you need. If you're going to bed at 11 and you're waking up at 8, then you're getting that plus a little bit more. So you can say, we can be flexible and let you go to bed at 11 since you're not really having to be up until 8. So that's where I think it's important that families be flexible where you can. Now, we all know, especially, those of us who have adolescents, it's not always that easy. So I think about what are the other things other than planning out a good bedtime that you can do that's proactive. I have never had kids in summer camps, never have kids who have trouble going to sleep. We want to try to wear our kids out as much as we can. So that ties back to the exercise issue. So if you have a swimming pool or have access to a swimming pool, I've never seen so many people out walking and riding their bikes as I have in Dallas recently. It feels like we're at the beach. It's nice to see people coping with this through really healthy means, which is exercise. So I think engage your adolescent in a discussion of what's a healthy bedtime. Try to set up a lot of physical activity, and then some of the other things that are soothing. Adolescents, interestingly, very different from when I was younger, see the value in different types of relaxation-based strategies. There's a really good, a lot of different apps, the Calm app. There's an app called Insight Timer. There's an app called Headspace. All of these are more meditative type apps that allow students to kind of get in the right mental frame to go to sleep. I just think we just have to, through what we model, and I think it's important that parents model, we just have to convey to our kids how important them being active and them being well rested is to their emotional wellness.
Absolutely. That's some really great advice there. And I just want to say for our viewers that we will send a follow-up email with the resources that you're identifying. That's why I'm busy writing down, but we'll get those out to you all.
Yeah.
If we have a child who has some learning challenges, whether it's ADD in my case or whatever else it might be, can you talk about that and how we might structure things maybe a little differently, or what extra care we need to give to helping our special education kids?
Of course, I think that when we go back to, you've seen a number of posts about teachers and medical professionals and first responders. I think that through this, we really do understand that these professions, these individuals, really, by virtue of what they do in the classroom, we need to follow their role models. A typical classroom day, there's some exceptions, but a typical classroom day has on the wall a structure. 8 to 9, we do this. 9 to 9:30, we do this. If you've ever gone on a trip where you didn't know the itinerary, that's pretty discombobulating. So travel agents know this. Teachers know this. For students who have attention problems, for students who have different learning disabilities, autism spectrum issues, a visual schedule is one of the easiest and most productive things that you can do to give them the itinerary for the day. And
that's great.
And additionally, it lets you, as you're trying to figure out algebra and theorems and algebra, you at least don't have to worry about what comes next because it's on the wall. I would write it down and I would have kids reference it and script it out. That's going to organize them. I think the other thing to do, parents, is to remember that for younger kids, when I go observe classrooms, teachers are having kids get up and do physical activity anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. The typical student's attention span, i.e. adults, is 30 to 45 minutes. And so we need to make sure that we're getting up. There's some really good content websites, YouTube videos. If you just search classroom movement activities, there's some activities that you can do to get all children moving that upregulates their dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that when children with ADHD take Ritalin or Adderall or those derivative medications, you're boosting, you're just enhancing dopamine. So exercise can do the same thing. Make sure that we're getting our kids active while they're doing that. And then specific to those specific populations, they're very much reward driven. A lot of times when families hear reward, they think bribe. The difference between a bribe and reward is pretty significant. Bribing someone to do something is paying them something to do something illegal or immoral. Positive reinforcement is why people use certain airline points, certain airlines and credit cards to get points. That is an incentive that's given to drive good behavior. So if we want our students to have that structure and follow that structure, we can provide rewards that are along the lines of, we'll arm wrestle, we will get out the new thing that came from Amazon and put it together. Those are intrinsic rewards that the best rewards that kids like really is individual time with their parents, doing something with their parents when they're younger. Older kids, they like the reward of independence and being left alone and not being told about all the chores they haven't done yet. So think about your student, think about what it is that's reinforcing to him or her, and then, follow grandma's rule. Remember, grandma's rule is you eat your peas before you have your dessert. And if we follow that rule, then we can get most of our kids to do the things we want them to do.
That's great. Thank you. I know my children will appreciate your wise words, and I'm not supposed to be yelling at them about their undone chores. I'm a divorce attorney, so I work with a lot of families who are in different households and trying to manage that. Do you have any advice for our divorced families in terms of what strategies they should use in educating their homes into different environments?
Excellent. The rule on, there is such thing as a successfully divorced family. And for me, the rule is, are you co-parents? So whatever differences in your marriage relationship that resulted in the divorce, are you able to set those aside and ask yourself the question, what is really best for our children? And what's best for our children is direct communication, clear communication about where the children will be. Different parents have different strengths and weaknesses. And so, you can speak to visitation schedules and such like that. We can't ever make specific recommendations regarding that, but families and divorced parents should feel comfortable if one parent has more of a strength as a homeschooler, as an at-schooler, then you may want to be flexible in terms of how your children spend their time. I think the foundation answer, Jennifer, though, is co-parent. Make sure that you are honed in on what's best for the children, and then mimic schedules between the two homes as much as you can. Every home has its own unique system and the way that it operates, but as much as we can adhere to sleep schedules, exercise schedules, visual schedules that walk the child through the day, then the transition of going from home A to home B is minimized by that consistency between the two of you. And then lastly, get along. I think the most important thing for all of us is that even though we're all more emotional and we're having, the common feelings that have connected the thread of the families that I've worked with have been scared. So it's a fear feeling. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of grief for what we've lost in terms of missed spring break trips and missed time with friends and missed end of the school year activities, and hopefully not, but loved ones who are sick or loved ones who are significantly impacted. So there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of loneliness. And so I think that we say with emotions, a lot of times you can tame it if you name it. So I think it's really important for families to be really emotionally aware and name the emotions for their children. All of us, I know in my generation, we were parented from where we're looked at for our behavior. What we want to encourage families to do is really be aware of what's going on with our children at an emotional level. If our children understand their emotions, then the behaviors that are causing us to yell or causing us to get angry or causing us to feel frustrated and do the things that we all feel guilty and frustrated with ourselves about, we're just going to be able to respond to them in a more consistent, measured, and non-reactive way.
That is such great advice. I will tell you, we have a resource on our website on the COVID-19 resource page. I've included a link here that has a downloadable form that it's for parents who are in separate households to at least communicate with each other. It gives you different options about how you're running things in your home so you can share it with the other person. It is not a tool to beat the other person up with and to tell them they have to do it this way, but it is to say this is how we're running things in our household to help facilitate communication. I also love what you just said about emotions, and I think it's really important. Parents are fallible too, right? And it's okay to let our kids know that what we're feeling as we go through this.
Yeah, and I think the rules too, for parents on sleep and on exercise. I mean, I just have talked with some moms who, and dads, but more so moms, they aren't able to go exercise. They're not able to follow their typical routine. They're not able to have their time. Dads are in similar situations where, they go to the gym. The gyms are closed. The places where we go to get away for our kids, the parks are closed. The athletic activities are shut down, and so it like we said, there's no paradigm. There's never ever a time in our history where we've had to confront these type of things, and so what we do is go back to our foundations. And I think that the talk about feelings, a lot of times when we greet each other, we say, how are you? But I really think that when we ask ourselves that or ask others of that, I think it's important that everybody pause and say, well, wait a minute, how am I really? I'm frustrated, I'm worried, I'm scared. People in our communities are worried about a variety of things. Am I educating my child the right way? What are we going to do with our finances? How about our grandparents? Speaking of grandparents, I think our grandparents are some of our best commodities right now for our kids. I feel like one of the things I'm encouraging some families to do is get, grandparents on FaceTime or some type of chat and tell our children the story of the family. Children love stories, they love narration. And so I think that one of the things that you can do when you're building your daily schedule is schedule time for, grandparents. That time is going to be reciprocal. Children will get their history of their family, that's educational. And then grandparents will feel connection and a sense of generativity. That's really the developmental stage for older individuals is, have I given back to the next generation? And that will prevent the isolation that I think a lot of the older members of our population are feeling. But at the same time, we're going to be educating our kids. And so I think parents think about education broadly, right? History, family history is as relevant as when, this treaty or that treaty was signed. Those things are really outside the box that we can think of. This is an opportunity for families to provide a different type of education to their children. So family history, an awareness of emotional health, these are opportunities we're given despite the crisis.
I love what you just said about involving grandparents. I've heard of, grandparents and children doing story time. And that goes for parents too. If you're separated from your children, it's a great thing to tell some stories. And family stories are great. I love that. We have a few more minutes before we open it up for the questions. So I just want to ask you, what do we need to look out for in our kids when they're experiencing anxiety and depression, and what kind of resources are available to them during this time?
Great question. So, it does connect, Jennifer, to the emotion theme. I think that a lot of schools and what I feel really personally passionate about is how important social emotional learning is in our schools and for our families. Our schools are really excellent in terms of providing academic material and curriculum that's scientifically based, that move our children along. This crisis, like I said, there's no template. So I'm having parents who really are high functioning individuals, very bright individuals who emotionally don't have the coping resources, the we'll call it EQ, the emotional intelligence, to know how to optimally handle this. And they're not skills that are developed over a course of 2 weeks in crisis. We develop these skills as a family, as a community, and really as a nation over time. And so I think this is a time where we look at how important increasing emotional health is, because as we're emotionally healthier, when this challenge or any other challenge comes, then as a family, as an individual, as a nation, we're able to cope. So to your specific question, the things to look at is right now, each of your children, how do they each cope? Some children cope through internalizing. They turn into themselves. They won't talk to you. You'll say, how's your morning? And they will grunt. That's an internalizer. You're going to have another child who is feeling the exact same emotion set, but he's coping through aggressive, kicking things, being harder on younger siblings. And so we really want to, as we see our children start to use these maladaptive coping expressions, which are expressions of their typical coping, we're just pushing them further out to the edge. So as we see them doing that, remind yourself to go to the emotion and try to ignore the behavior. So when you're saying you're being disrespectful, you're being rude, all very accurate, start out with, hey, you only act like this when you're really frustrated. Let's go in here. Let's see if we can sit down. They, of course, will say no, because we all say no. And you can say, all right, if you're not ready to do it right now, but we need to do it because there's some things I think I can do that can help you to feel better. And so just really thinking, simplistic, if there's one thing that people take away from our time today, if we can draw behavior back to emotion, name the emotion, tame the emotion, then behaviorally, we're going to be proactive in preventing our kids getting to more desperate means of acting out or internalizing their feelings. When our children, despite our efforts, are there, we are open. Other mental health professionals are open. Reach out to your pediatricians. If they're not available, call us. Here we have counselors who are able to talk with families, give practical advice. There's so many good mental health professionals in Dallas, and we are happy to help, and we are able to connect with families through telehealth to provide these services.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And so the best thing to do to get a hold of you is to go to your website.
Yeah, it's just the Housson Center. It's thehousoncenter.com. And then we have staff that are answering the phone. Our phone number is 214-351-0053. This feels like an infomercial, didn't mean it to, but we're available.
That's great. All right, we do have some questions here. So I'm going to start with a question from Laura. She says, I'm having a lot of battles with my third grader right now. If she doesn't understand something, she doesn't want me to explain it to her, and it's getting very frustrating. Additionally, she's lacking motivation, and I don't want to be her motivation. Talk to us, I'll let you go ahead and answer Laura's question and talk to us about motivation.
Yeah, great question, Laura. Thank you. So motivation, again, just what we've been talking about. We want to try to figure out what is the feeling your daughter's feeling that, behind that lack of motivation. It may be, my friends are such a source of fuel and I'm not able to recharge myself. And so I've developed a what does it matter anyway type attitude. So I think it's just important to, again, talk to your daughter about what is it that she's feeling, and then figure out how she can list out what she feels like she needs to do and also what you feel like she needs to do, and then figure out how you can incentivize or motivate or try to activate her to do those things. I don't know about, those of you out there listening, but more people have come in and talked to me about how they've been organizing their closets and their garages have never been clean. In graduate school, the joke was, I didn't study for the test, but my goodness, my apartment's clean. Sometimes if we can just if you can get your daughter to do something that is minimally productive, that's satisfying, and then you can, go from there. It's a common problem, the motivation right now, just because there is a lot of lethargy and kind of inactivity that people aren't getting up and getting their brains and their bodies activated. So it's harder to feel motivated to go do something. Thank you for the question.
We have another question from Gina, who says, my daughter is a dyslexic freshman in high school. She's already mentioned that distance learning is a lot more reading. Any advice on how I can support her at home? She's 14
Yes.
and does not want mom reading to her.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, Gina, I know, and I'm sorry I can't name the technology, but there are platforms where you could take that information, cut and paste it, and then it can be read to her. So we often recommend recorded books and books on tape, Audible. For students with dyslexia, there's recording. It used to be called Recording for the Blind Dyslexic. Now it's called Learning Ally. So there are those type of resources. I wonder if she's able to connect with a friend and them to talk about the content. Many kids that we work with dyslexia who don't have language processing problems, they're so good auditorily, if they can just hear it, then they're going to be able to consume it. Will she let her father or her sibling or a friend? Because it is a real challenge. And so if we can just get it read to her, then I think it will make it a little bit more user-friendly for her, hopefully.
Awesome. One of our viewers just posted a helpful tip that about Learning Ally, that they have books and textbooks that will read to you. And she says, if mom has her documentation, you can actually get the information for free. So that's a great tip. Thank you, Jennifer, for that.
Yeah. And what you do if you don't have the documentation, go to the professional who diagnosed. I've filled out a number of those forms, and they would be happy to sign that so you can access those supports. Thanks.
Awesome. Kelly says, I'm having trouble managing my oldest son, he's 10, who is not finishing schoolwork until 3:30 at the latest. My youngest son, who is 6, is finishing before lunch. This is causing a great deal of frustration for my older son. How can I help diffuse the drama and distraction from the variance in schedule? Great question.
It's a hard one. Now, I think that, there's so many more questions I have about that, so I'm going to do the best with the material that we've got. So what I would say, you want to identify why is that? Is it just that he has more content than his younger brother? And so there's that sense of unfairness. And so while the older son is doing his work, it may be that the younger one's doing a different type of work. He's helping out with chores or, doing those things. It may just be right now that your older son needs a little bit more of you in terms of, hey, let me sit down with you and let's kind of work through this so we can try to expedite it and get through it, more quickly. And it may be just depending on the family situation that the co-parent, the other parent comes in and helps. It's a real world problem where older kids do have more work, and but emotionally they still have the desire to be done and outside having fun, doing some of the things that we've talked about. So I would say provide support. A lot of the tutors who tutor are doing tutoring the same way we're doing this, through telehealth. There are executive function coaches and homework coaches and tutors, and sometimes it may be helpful to employ some of these third parties just to allow the process to go more smoothly.
That's a great idea. Laura says that schedules are key, and I totally agree that parents need to give themselves grace during this time. What do you, that goes back to the expectations, but what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, thank you. Amen. I mean, that's right on. And I think that if, it's effectively April 1st, school gets out middle of May to end of May. So if for worst case, our kids are getting a 70% dose of medication versus of education medication. I'm so used to talking about medication. If they're getting a 50 or a 60 or a 70% of the typical what they get, I think we have to be okay with that. I think that, again, when we think about education, don't only think about consumption of curriculum. Think about, family history. Think about online learning, Khan Academy, Brain Pop. There's so much educational content that they can be exposed to and that they can cognitively adapt to. And I think that just depending on when kids go back to school, there are things that can be done over the summer so that our children are going to be ready for next year, and that their growth, that their academic growth and development isn't going to be significantly stunted.
That's really good news, and I think it's good to keep that perspective. This is not a permanent situation, right? It's a temporary situation.
And I think, families and parents reframe this is a really opportunity to teach emotional intelligence, social intelligence, increase our connectivity to each other, because all of the research that talks about what drives outcomes is on more EQ factors than IQ and academic factors. They're certainly relevant, but if you have someone who isn't equipped in terms of handling stress and doesn't have grit and doesn't have persistence and doesn't have stamina, it's more challenging. So use this time to work on those skills.
That is great. All right, Rachel asks a question that I know a lot of us are dealing with, and that is, my kids are extroverts and struggling with loneliness. Online connection doesn't seem to fill their tanks, and at times is even frustrating. Any thoughts?
Yeah, a good question. I think that extroverts tend to be people who connect well to others, and I think that there's different ways we can connect. So we're confined, by social distancing, but an extrovert, that doesn't prevent an extrovert from connecting. So that may mean your extrovert writes letters to first responders or people in nursing homes. That may mean that your extrovert, cooks or makes amazing TikTok videos. Right? So it may mean that your extroverts go about connecting with others within the confines of our restrictions so that they can connect. It really is, there unfortunately isn't an answer that's going to, there's no easy answer. Extroverts, people like social connection. And so, we just want to do the best. And then I would say use the media, Zoom phone calls, FaceTime where multiple friends can do it. Our kids have been doing that, and they've done different activities with their friends and made music. Just have them do it as virtually as they can. And that's goes to the question before, Jennifer. I just think we have to use, media and social media much differently.
That's great. I would suggest that they host a webinar. It's working for me.
Yeah, exactly. That would be great.
All right, real quick, and this kind of dovetails on that and social media, and I'll ask a follow-up questions. What are your thoughts about Snapchat with teen friends? Are you in favor of that during this time?
I hope my kids aren't listening. Snapchat, a cell phone, a car, these are all opportunities, and they're indicators of independence. And so the first question that we ask on when do we give children phones? When do we give children Snapchats? What are the likelihood? When do children get their car? When do they drive? There's age guidelines that are recommended, but more important is what are the developmental guidelines? So the thing you ask yourself really ideally before you give that material is what's the likelihood of success with that medium? And so if you're pretty certain that your son or daughter is going to use Snapchat appropriately, and that's really hard to quantify by virtue of the format. I think that it's important to sit down before you give those apps to your children and say, here's the rules. How can you provide us with the security that this is going to be used the way that we'd like it to be used? Let's start out with FaceTime. Let's start out with other Instagram, other mediums that we can check in on you, make sure that you're using it effectively. I tell parents a lot, by junior year, you would like to have your children in a car with a phone using media and them doing it, making the errors that they're going to make. So by senior year, they're pretty well on autopilot. They still need our parenting and our suggestions. And then they're ready to go to college and not make the life-changing errors and mistakes that we all worry about. So what I would say on Snapchat is if your student is sneakier, if your child is not inclined to be honest and open with you, then I would caution on that, because you're going to be in a situation where someone else takes the error with Snapchat is that it disappears. Most kids have a phone and an iPhone, a phone and an iPad, and they very quickly can screenshot that without actually screenshotting it. And so it doesn't go away into, the black hole of the internet, and helping kids to understand that. I would always pay attention to where your child is developmentally. And if you're unsure, that's where it's helpful to talk to teachers who know your students or counselors to kind of get that input. They're hard decisions, but I always just say, what is it, where is it that we want to be at age 16? Where is it that we want to be at age 18? Where do we want to be at age 20? And if you're not on that developmental trajectory, then things may have to slow down, even if everyone else has Snapchat.
That's such great advice. And I'm just going to say to everybody who's viewing, if you ever happen to see an inappropriate post by a Hargrave kid, I would like to know. So I think as parents, we can do each other a lot of help if we look out for each other, and just give a heads up if you see something going on and you're concerned about the kiddo. Let the parent know. Not all parents want to know, but I'll tell you I do. Okay, we have another question. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you all. We're going to wrap up at 60 minutes. I'm not sure whether we can stay on after that or not, but we will give it a try. So if your question hasn't been answered yet, and Dr. Housson can stay on for a few more minutes, that's great. But I'm going to go ahead and ask a question from Lydia. Says, any suggestions on how to organize my son's distance learning assignments? I'm a little overwhelmed keeping up with his assignments and deadlines. He's in middle school and struggles with executive function. He has several teachers, and they are emailing assignments and using various platforms like Google Classroom, Zoom, and Google Docs. It's a great question. It's hard for so many of these kiddos to keep up with their own work. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And those are really some of the things, Lydia, that I think schools are trying to figure out. The first thing that I would do would be to give the school and the teacher the feedback that there's multiple platforms, because to your point, kids with executive function weaknesses can't juggle all those balls. And so what I would do in that particular situation, if you're really getting all those different inputs, is have a time before your son even begins working where you go and access all the different portals of information and just write it down on a piece of paper for him and say, and then next to each assignment, put a box and say, okay, do this one, help him to figure out which one he wants to do first or second, and help to prioritize. Students with attention and executive weaknesses have trouble with prioritizing, I can't speak, organizing and planning and initiation. And so if you're able to be the funnel that kind of organizes that for him, then I think it'll be easier for him to prioritize it.
That's awesome. Sky chimed in with a useful tip. She suggested reaching out to counselors as well. She said their school scaled back because of parent and student feedback. So I would hope in these days that our schools are open to that kind of feedback so they can know how to better provide resources for our children. All right.
That's right.
We're kind of at the time to wrap up. You have any closing words for us?
No, I think, we just need to all join hands and kind of connect with each other, even though we're not physically able to do so. Like I said, no other time in our history, recent history, have grandparents and mothers and fathers and adolescents and children be affected by one common thing. And I think for a lot of us, it's tailspin us. In order to right our ship and kind of move forward as a family, as an individual, as a family, as a community, and really as a nation, I think that we have to think a little bit more collectively like we've had to. We've had to not go and do some of the things that have been good for us, but we're doing things that are good for our society. And so while we maintain our individualism and we maintain a desire to be centered on ourselves, which means we're focused on what each one of us needs to do, very different from self-centered. Being centered on oneself means you do what you know in order to make yourself tick well. We also have to be centered on others. And I think by combining those two and using school resources, counselor resources, grandparent resources, our children are some of our best resources. They are better than all of us at play. Just real quick, I put some things. We've been doing a lot of this at home, lots of cards. My 10 and 12-year-old are now very good at 5-card draw and 5-card stud and 7-card draw. We've been playing lots of poker. Their goal is not for them to go to Vegas, but it passes the time and they enjoy it. So play with your kids. Use this as an opportunity to play and connect.
I know we've been playing Settlers of Catan in the version of Settlers of COVID. Toilet paper is one of the main resources. That's awesome. Well, this has been so great. Just a few takeaways that I'm walking away with today is the importance of exercise and the importance of sleep. We can't underestimate those things, and the importance of our emotional connections that we share with each other. So I really thank you, Dr. Housson, for your time. I do just want to say, if anybody out there is concerned or knows someone who is concerned or has questions about how the current situation is affecting their custody arrangement, we are offering a COVID consultation, and you can find out more information along with other resources that hopefully can support your family on our website. And we will follow up with links to Dr. Housson's website as well as other resources that were mentioned in this. Thank you all so much.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody. Jennifer, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.